Hi, and welcome to From Many People's Strength, the podcast that covers Saskatchewan politics and current events. My name is Corey, and my pronouns are he and him.
And my name is David. My pronouns are they and them, and I'm okay with he and him as well.
And we're joined by Steve.
Hi, I'm Steve, Steve Boots, and my pronouns are he, him.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us, Steve. I guess a little bit about yourself, if in case people don't know you.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Who are you, Steve?
Well, for most folks, they'll probably recognize me from either TikTok or Twitter. I've kind of gained a little bit of notoriety in the last year or so for, my political hot takery on Twitter and doing some breakdowns of current events. And then I also post quite a bit on TikTok. And same thing, sort of breakdowns of current events, talking about politics, and sort of just being Canadian TikTok social studies teacher, I guess.
Cool.
Yeah.
So what got you started doing like the TikTok?
Okay, so my day job is as a teacher. And it literally happened because I was avoiding working on report cards. I had a big stack of marking, and I was like looking for excuses not to do it. And I sort of consciously made the decision to record on what I thought was an uninteresting topic, just to sort of like take a kick at the can. And so I recorded on the departure of the head of the SHA, Scott Livingston. And it did like 70,000 views in like the first day or two. And it was sort of this like, I guess this is a thing I do now. And just sort of got into it from there and built a bunch of momentum, and I'm having a lot of fun with it. So
right on.
Yeah.
And you've kind of, you started a podcast as well.
I did. I recorded about 6 episodes of it over my February break. And it's up on all the standard podcast things. I'll probably revisit at some point, but it's given me a tremendous amount of respect for folks who do podcasts regularly, because it is so much work. So good on you guys for pursuing it.
It is a little bit of work, yeah.
It's a lot nicer to sit in this chair and just show up and talk.
Yeah,
Agreed.
for sure.
Agreed. That's my job every time we do this. So I wholeheartedly support that sentiment. But it was definitely the TikTok fame. I think that is why we invited you. So it was a month or two ago, Corey had talked about possibly bringing in people. I'm like, okay, so there's this guy on TikTok that I've been following like for a while now. We need to get him on. He does what we do, but better. So
I don't know about that, but it's so funny. Like, I have my fiance and I joke sometimes that like my background is like this perfect arc towards what I'm doing now. Like in university, I studied film, I studied English lit. I worked as a stand-up comedian when I was in university, and then like did social studies education and all that stuff, and just have been a policy and politics nerd for my whole life. And it's just sort of like a thing that I stumbled into that it turned out I'd been sort of prepping for my whole life. So,
well, the
format kind of happened.
The format of the bite-sized portions, I think, is probably well suited to teachers more than most people think, because you're probably dealing with students whose attention span isn't always much more than 1 to 3 minutes. So you have to compartmentalize things into, I need to get that fundamental point across within 60 seconds or I'll lose people.
It's pacing, it's timing, it's sort of like knowing, like, I teach middle years, which is like somewhere between grade 6 and 9-ish.
Okay.
And the most important skill, there's a bunch, but one of the most important skills is the ability to explain a complicated thing simply, right? And I think that's sort of where I try to come from, is to explain complicated things simply and to give them in sort of, like you said, manageable bite-sized pieces.
Feels like the opposite of my skill set.
That's what you and I will. I think I'm probably relatively similar to. I pontificate a little too long at times and don't keep it as bite-sized, but yeah. Well, speaking of,
I tend to. I was just gonna say I tend to explain simple things very long and complex ways, and until they almost make no sense. So,
well, see, for me, it's funny. Like I tend to be a fairly concise person just in life, but I record most of my TikToks a sentence or two at a time, which makes it really easy to be concise. Because if I get rambling, I'll just go, I'll take another pass at that one. And so it makes it really easy to be really tight and concise that way. Like editing sentence by sentence isn't a thing that's really feasible anywhere other than that.
Yeah, for sure.
Speaking of trying to break things into bite-sized portions, we want to start tackling a couple of the stories. And
sure. Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe doubles down after carbon comments criticized. So he said some pretty dumb shit about carbon and not not caring. And now he is saying, I guess this came out on April 11th. So that's a few days ago, like almost 2 weeks. And he said he is standing with the I don't care right now when it comes to the metric of per capita emissions. This is, I think I've encountered this quite a bit, actually. I've heard John Gormley say that the per capita measurement, he doesn't like that. I've heard lots of right-wingers talk about this as per capita is not an important measure to them.
So I have super mixed feelings about it because, like, in Saskatchewan, per capita isn't great context for carbon. There's way better ways to contextualize it. But per capita is also
per company, perhaps. but
per capita is an easy thing to wrap your head around. So it's a stat that we jump to quite quickly. And so, like, I get why, like, I think contesting using per capita, it makes some sense. Like, there's maybe better ways to have that conversation. But this I don't care stuff, he knows exactly what he's doing, right? Yeah, he's just signaling the base as loud as possible, maybe swinging some flares above his head.
Yeah. Because the point about per capita, the underlying argument that if you're an exporting economy, per capita can be problematic because you're not the ones consuming that production of carbon. Like, that carbon production is being generated by consumption that's occurring elsewhere where there is more capita. But you do, like, the I don't care line is so, again, as you said, it's signaling the base, because you could make that same argument and come back, a week later and say, you know what, that was a poor choice of words. That would require a conservative to admit they ever did something wrong, but it was a poor choice of words. I do care. I care about the bad reputation Saskatchewan is getting from this. I care that we are being falsely maligned. I care that the planet is, being taken care of in the best way possible. I care that there are polluters elsewhere who are consuming what we export and they're not getting the blame, but we are. Like, you could still, even sticking to the conservative worldview of what they're trying to say, you could still say it in a way that's not, I don't care. You could talk about what you do care about. But I'm always skeptical anytime anyone makes a point of saying what they don't care about, because people who actually don't care about things don't talk about them. Yeah. Like, if you're talking about something, if you're investing energy, and this is across the spectrum, that person who, quote unquote, doesn't care about representation in a movie. No, they do care. They care that it's not white dudes anymore, or what have you. They care enough to be passionate about it. Yeah. But they're hiding behind this, I don't care. And I think Scott Moe is just taking that, 14-year-old nerd on Reddit mentality and expanding it to a far more serious issue.
I think that's a big part of it, but I think there's also an important thing that we need to keep our eye on, which is the tactic that he's using here, which is he's shifted the conversation to being about his comments rather than the issue of carbon itself. Yeah. Right? Yeah. By playing this game that he plays where he yells, I don't care, and then everybody goes, he doesn't care, and he's like, no, I don't, haha. All of a sudden, the conversation is about that, and nobody's talking about the massive carbon emissions that Saskatchewan puts out, right? Like, he's really mastered the art of this deflection, right? And then he gets a whole news cycle about that, instead of about the carbon emissions that are the real issue here.
Well, it's it's been said on the show a couple times in the past about how there's this concept of Hanlon's razor. Don't attribute to malice that which can be attributed to incompetence. But I think conservatives have weaponized that. Like, I think of that when I think of Trudeau a lot. Like, anytime we think about Trudeau being this evil Machiavellian mastermind, I think, well, I think sometimes he just makes mistakes. This isn't a big Machiavellian plot. But I think conservatives almost weaponize it to defend themselves. It's like, oh, ho, ho, this guy's not actually intentionally doing all of these horrible, evil things. He's just a doddering old fool. And I think it helps disguise some pretty shitty behavior that's intentional and thought out.
And that's it, right? Like, he knows what he's doing. It's all super strategic. And, like, we all know he's getting his marching orders from resource companies, right? Like, he's figured out how to play the game just to keep the money flowing, to keep the machine running.
Catch and release. This is a story about some arson that happened in, I believe it was Elida. Angela and Clayton Erickson saw like their son burned down their house, and I think other buildings as well.
Two other vacant homes.
Yeah, and the administrative office in Elida. And this story, it's a very, I thought it was really a sad story. Like, obviously, this is a person with needed support and mental health supports way earlier than now, and didn't get them because it seems like a very systemic like failure to me. Not because people didn't try, but because sometimes there's limitations on the system, and I don't know. I know somebody in the Saskatchewan subreddit, which is my favorite place to go to get abused by conservatives. They said that this is a story about why we need more police in rural areas. But I feel like that's the wrong way to go on this.
I mean, it comes down to, in my mind, it more illustrates the need for mental health supports rather than the need for police, right? Like, I know the last time I heard, which was about a month ago, the waiting list for psychiatric care in Saskatoon was 800 people long. Like, if you need mental health care right now, the waiting list is somewhere around 18 months. Like, people just aren't getting help. And by the time they are getting help, you know, the situations they're in are so far advanced that the help is not too late. I don't want to say that, but it's not timely by any stretch.
Yeah, I suppose it depends on, because in some cases it is too late. We have like what would consider quite a number of suicides that happen in rural Saskatchewan. And maybe if we had some mental health supports, that wouldn't be as prevalent of an issue.
Well, and the idea about more policing is problematic. You know, again, I don't think anyone is shocked by our views on that, but we don't have a minority report situation. Like, the crimes that were the warning signs were not crimes that put someone away for life. Right? Like, they are, and we don't put people in jail, or even the hard on crime folks typically don't think we should be putting people in jail for thought crimes or like what we think they may do in the future. And quite frankly, if we're using this case, he's going to be the absolute last person that ends up facing severe consequences for those early crimes. Because let's be honest, if we start ramping up punishments for those early warning sign crimes, it's not going to be the white, rural, middle class guy who probably knows the local cop, who probably drinks with, people in town. Like, my go-to story. We see the difference between what happens when people like Scott Moe break the law as a 20-something-year-old versus what happens to people of color, people from marginalized communities. Like, if we're talking about this as okay, we should be punishing people like this more harshly, we really shouldn't have Scott Moe as our premier. Like, that's the type of person you're talking about. Whereas if we start talking about mental health supports, then we can start saying, hey, this person hasn't committed a crime yet, or the crime that they've committed are such that, are fines or what have you. They're small crimes, even if they do warrant incarceration time, realistically should be smaller. But we can recommend mental health supports. We can get them the treatment that they need. We can get them, because most people I know, virtually everyone I know that struggles with mental health wants support, wants to be talking to someone who can make the pain go away, or at least make the pain more manageable. So that's the way of getting help for people who are in the early stages before they are burning down homes and really seriously harming people.
For me, it's I think this illustrates how, you said, that people, people can get help or people want help. But in this case, this kid, he's waiting in a jail cell right now because there's no room at the psychiatric hospital. But there's plenty of beds, right? But only half in the secure wing are active right now because there's just nobody to work. Right. It's so just shines such a bright light on the way that our system is just critically underfunded, and the government just keeps building buildings and not funding them, right? We're only running half the beds. The kid in this story, he clearly needs a lot of support and help, and it's just not there. It kills me.
And one thing's when I am trying to do sort of bridge that divide between those who are more supportive of policing in general, I go back to using the phrase if we think there should be police, let's let police be police, right? They were hired to do a certain job. I don't know very many cops, but the cops I do know and the cops I do talk to don't want to be psychiatrists. They don't want to be mental health professionals. They don't want to be social workers. They were hired. They went into that field to, quote unquote, stop bad guys. And they don't want to be spending their time having to be an emotional support, to be psychiatric support. So let's get the funding into places where we can actually hire the people who want to do the job that needs to get done. And if we're going to keep cops, and I think I'm in the minority that thinks we shouldn't. So if we are keeping cops, let's let them do cop shit as opposed to doing the job of people who are better trained and trained in that area to do the work that needs to be done.
Our SHA was warned of a lengthened COVID wave after Scott Moe said he'd scrap the restrictions. And this was on April 13th. This came out. And records reveal provincial officials mauled asking police, fire, and city staff to help fill roles in the province's COVID-19 response. There's obviously some issues where when you don't have any restrictions, things keep happening. It doesn't go away just because you want it to.
There was a really great This Hour Has 22 Minutes skit I saw on YouTube the other day where it was, hey, it's our end of COVID party. And it's these two people talking about, isn't it great that COVID's over? What a great end of COVID party. And then they go, oh, by the way, is it just the two of us? Yeah. Where's Sue? Oh, she's got COVID. And then she just consistently are asked, where's so-and-so? Oh, they're in Bahamas. Oh, okay. Oh, they got stuck there because of COVID. And they go through this entire list of every one of their friends, and every single person couldn't attend because they got COVID, literally to the joke being in the middle of the party, they pull out the rapid test and have COVID. But I think and it's satire, right? So it takes the reality and expands it. But holy fuck, is it true? You try and do anything these days and you're hearing about all of these people who can't do whatever it is because of COVID. And amongst the vaccinated part of the population, it tends to be more of a case of, I'm feeling sick, I'm staying home, I had to take a week off work, or I had to, it's an inconvenience amongst people who are privileged enough to have work that allows you to have paid time off, and who are healthy enough to be such that vaccination will protect them to the degree to which it's an inconvenience rather than life-threatening. But it seems like a hell of a lot more people have COVID now than a year and a half ago when there were restrictions, and we're just like covering our eyes and pretending it's not happening, and it's...
Yeah.
I remember at the start of the pandemic, like, somebody would get COVID and it would sort of like make its way around the sort of like grapevine. Everybody would be like, oh, did you hear so-and-so got COVID? And it was like big news. And now by this point, just it seems like everybody's got it at any given moment. Like it's like nothing I've ever seen. But, and yet everybody seems to be just carrying on as if everything is just A-okay. Don't even worry about it. The cognitive dissonance is like just unbelievable. And so my fiance is immunocompromised, and so we wear our N95s everywhere we go. And like the looks we get are man. Like it's bizarre. Like there's just this weird hostility. It's like you're a reminder of something that they don't want to think about, you know?
I think that's literally what it is, right?
Yeah. We can't pretend it's gone if we still see people wearing masks.
Exactly.
Exactly.
But they don't make you walk into a store and they are woefully understaffed, or you go into the mall and there are stores shut down because they don't have enough staff, period. People don't connect that's all being caused by COVID too. This idea that we're reopening for the economy when reopening is hurting the economy just as much, if not more, is this weird disconnect. Like those things aren't reminders.
Oh, and like a lot of folks I know right now are actually like either very recently moved back to the office or in the process of moving back to the office as everybody is sick. So it's much harder to move everybody back to the office. And it's just like, it feels like the weirdest, least interesting Twilight Zone episode.
Yeah.
Like a season 7 sort of thing.
The memes going around about I need to apologize to the writers of Jurassic Park, that a corporation's reopening in spite of things being incredibly unsafe and dangerous is a lot more realistic than I thought it was when that movie came out. People can just continuing to do the same thing over and over again, expecting different results each time, and
the one that I love is the people just baselessly saying like, yeah, I'm just kind of over it. That's not you get to do quite how this works. Like, you can't just ask to speak to COVID's manager.
Yeah, and I'm over it too. I get it, but it doesn't mean I stop wearing the mask, and it doesn't mean I.
That's it.
Yeah, it's
I'm
we're
a
all
teacher.
over it.
I've been at work every day for the last 2 years and a bit, just reacting constantly and in a mask all day. Like, I promise you, I am exactly as sick of it as you are. I just don't have the luxury of saying, guess not.
Yeah. That's one of the things that I'm trying to figure out exactly what people are complaining about when they're talking about like all our freedoms being restricted, because I was still like, we had to be in the car, but we still went out and we picked up food and we were outside of the house. Like, no, but there wasn't like the police barricading us in our doors and like.
But even now, when people are like, I just want everything to go back to normal, like, you are not being denied any sort of normal. Like, there's no rules.
That's
like,
right.
what are you?
There is a denial of normal. It's a
funny.
Natural phenomenon doing it, though. Like, COVID is what's denying us normal, but we just keep not dealing with that.
And I think, but there's this incredibly unrealistic streak in a lot of people where they think that things are just going to go back to the way they were in like 2005 and we're just going to carry on. It's like, there's going to be hand sanitizer stations everywhere you go from here to eternity now. Like, that's never going away.
Yeah.
Like, people, I think people are still grieving or dealing with all of the sort of collective trauma that they went through and just aren't ready to accept that things are going to be different.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's, I don't think people realize like how much a society will change when this type of structural phenomenon happens. Like when the H1N1 pandemic happened several years back, it didn't hit North America nearly as hard as it hit Asia. And like mask wearing became the normal. Like when COVID hit, the idea of wearing masks wasn't as unusual because that was just what you do. If you're feeling sick, you wear a mask. Like that's just been ingrained into the culture, and it had been for over a decade now. So I suspect, there are going to be people in North America who 10 years from now, when, COVID is a unpleasant memory, or at least hopefully is an unpleasant memory. It's the thing we get vaccinated for yearly or whatever that happens, who will treat wearing a mask in 2030 the same way people who were hit hard by the 2009 H1N1 treat wearing a mask today. So,
well, it's funny because I think a part of that change is going to happen just because with the age group that I work with, they don't care. They'll wear a mask. It doesn't bother them none for the most part. Because they're just used to it. To them, it's just a nothing thing for the most part. It's a minor annoyance, but it's a nothing thing.
Yeah.
And so I think you'll have a generation of people who, when it is time, when there's a COVID-24 or whatever new thing, because there will be. I think it will be easier next time around in that sense, just because there's going to be a whole generation of people who have wrapped their head around it. But
makes sense.
Who knows?
Easier and harder. I think you'll have more resistance. The people who are going to resist it are going to resist it even harder at the start, I think.
I never fully wrapped my head around why the conservative movement grabbed on so tightly to resisting masks. How that became a specifically conservative thing. Because in most Asian countries, there are conservative politicians and conservative parties that never grabbed onto the politicization of masking. So I don't know why it was. Just did they see a wedge and grab onto it as tightly as they could?
Go ahead.
I think if anything, there was conspiracies around just COVID wasn't real at all. So any measure you take, so whatever measure got taken was this is a liberal conspiracy. So it could have been hand sanitizer. It could have been but I think masking grew to be one of those, hey, we've discovered this is really effective. And for people to go, okay, well, obviously then, since my worldview requires this pandemic to be a conspiracy, anything that someone who says it's real is saying to do must be dangerous. It'd be if Scott Moe all of a sudden came out one day and said, use DoorDash instead of skip the dishes, I'd be naturally skeptical about using DoorDash. It's because of he's someone I'm naturally skeptical of. My natural inclination would be, why is DoorDash now installed rolling coal in all their delivery vehicles? I don't it's
Yeah, that's right.
And I would hope that I am self-aware enough that after I sat down and okay, no, it just turned out his cousin is owns part of the company. So it's biased, but whatever. It's still just no different from the millionaire owning this company or the millionaire owning that company. I would hope I could then sit down and put that bias to the side for a bit. But I think if you've decided in your heart of hearts that Dr. Fauci is working for a secret pedophile ring in a pizza parlor or what have you, anything he tells you to do is evil. So that's my long rambling answer to a fairly simple question.
It conveniently hit upon a really interesting time politically when conspiracy theories were becoming the mainstream view of the conservative movement. And Donald Trump was the figurehead pushing a lot of this stuff. And also the more you want to hate the people that you disagree with, if you have some easy identifier like a mask, then okay, mask wearers are the enemy now. Well, you can't tell if somebody's using hand sanitizer, right? You can't tell if they're following measures in some other way. But a mask, now I can say, you're the guy. You're the person that I disagree with. So it's really lots of factors played into it, I think.
You're probably right.
It's almost like I've had a couple people say, like, 3 years ago, if they saw someone with a Canadian flag on the roof of their truck, they would go, okay, that's that's great.
Whatever,
Good for you, man. Like, probably put it up on Canada Day and forgot to take it down. Or, maybe there's a really important hockey game coming up. But we see it now, and, like, it's a scary thing now, right? Like, that's a thing where I'm like, okay, am I safe to be in this environment? Like, I literally have those natural inclinations now. And Canadian flags, there's a history of colonialism and there's some ass issues there. But, like, 3 years ago, I would have said they were a relatively innocuous, harmless thing. Well, and now they've grown to not be because of who they're associated with.
I vividly remember I used to live in the UK, and you were very often told to stitch like a Canadian flag on your bags because they'd be less likely to be stolen, just because it was sort of like this widely regarded as sort of positive thing. And it feels like, you're right. That's been tainted for sure.
I think outside of Canada, I hope it's maybe not still quite that degree, but maybe not. I don't know.
I feel like nearly every country is dealing with its own populist movements right now. So I don't know if Canada would be singled out by any stretch.
Yeah. In the same way, like, if I saw someone with a UK flag here, I probably wouldn't think anything of it. Whereas I know for a while now they've run into some of those issues where groups like Britain First are sort of emulating the American flavor of nationalism. So
Dustin Duncan, the Minister of Education, says COVID measures in high schools is not going to happen. I think the headline basically explains the story. Like, he said this is not a thing he's interested in pushing forward. I don't know exactly why. I guess I do know why, because it's partisan politics. It's their team. But
so I think there's a little bit more to it than that. Okay. And I think it's a symptom of a larger issue. And he's been playing this game basically since the pandemic started. And it basically in about, I want to say 2013, but I may have my years wrong because I'm terrible at years. The government actually looked at dissolving individual school boards and just amalgamating all of the school divisions like they did with the health region. And they got a lot of blowback for that, but they have been eroding boards' power for years and years and years. So like they took away the ability to control the mill rate, so they like centralized education funding and a bunch of stuff. And they've been stripping power from the boards, and this is 100% what happened, or what they're doing. They when they were trying to dodge the mask thing, so there was a period of time where there was no mask mandates, and there was like really widespread calls for mask mandates in school divisions. And the government punted the decision down to the divisions and said, well, divisions can decide. And I think all of the divisions, maybe one or two holdouts, but I'm pretty sure all of the divisions decided to implement mask mandates. Basically, from the looks of it, it looks like the government handed this teeny tiny sliver of authority back to the divisions and are like snatching it back as tightly as all get out. And it's just, it's a centralization of power thing. They are so thoroughly convinced that they know best. But I will tell you, like, it varies a lot from school to school, but masking remains pretty prevalent in schools, like, especially among the older age groups. Like, kids know what's going on. They're usually pretty plugged into the world, and they're smart, right? Like, they see their friends going off sick, and they think, it's maybe time to put this thing back on.
My kids never stopped. Like, obviously, they have me as their dad and know my opinion on things. We're a pretty open household about talking about things, and they know they're allowed to disagree with me on most stuff. And if they had taken their masks off at school, we would have talked about it. But ultimately, I can't force them to wear it while they're at school. I'm not going to punish them for not doing it if the school says they're allowed to not. But like. Mm-hmm. they definitely are. Like they're pretty passionate. My older son had a social studies project. He's in grade 8, and he had a social studies project a few months ago, and like he just wrote an entire comic book all about. Like he's even more political than I am at times. So, like the stupidity of people not wearing masks, and so like they're and it sounds like most of their classmates are all wearing them. So it's a good thing. But
so this is entirely just anecdotal, but I talked to a fair number of teachers. It sounds like to a pretty strong degree, it just depends on whether or not the teachers in an individual classroom or an individual school are wearing masks. Like in a class where the teacher didn't continue wearing their masks, the students typically took them off. Younger kids generally aren't masking a ton, I don't think, just because it's tough. It's really tough. Like with a kindergartner, how do you do that all day? I have no idea. I can't pretend to understand. That feels like nailing gel into a wall, but yeah, with the older ones, like I think it depended on the school, and like I think certain divisions, as soon as the mask mandates were dropped, it was like just gone. You'll never see another mask again. But I think in the cities, especially, masking stayed pretty strong. The problem is like this whole personal responsibility nonsense means that we wind up in this place where like I have no idea if it's a good idea to still be wearing a mask, if I should still be wearing a mask, like. To know what the quote-unquote right decision is, I have no earthly idea. I'm leaving my mask on because I tend to err on the side of caution, but I have no idea if that's what I should be doing. Like, and it's really hard to get a straight answer because we don't know how many cases there are. We don't know how many, whatever there are. So, like, tell me I'm not the only one who's just sort of winging it.
Yeah, no doubt.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yep. If I see an empty store, I will often run in without a mask. If I see a packed store, I'm putting the mask on.
And that's it. Like, and like the one that makes me laugh, my fiance and I, like, you're just sort of like stuck in the force of habit. Because we walk from the car, we get out of the car, we put on a mask, walk into the restaurant, sit at the table, and then just take off the mask and start eating and drinking and whatever, right?
Yeah.
And we haven't quite wrapped our head around the fact that like that 30 seconds of mask was probably completely pointless. We just sort of still do it because you just don't know what to do. And so you just sort of do it all the time, right?
Yeah. That's right. Sask Health official says the hospitals are bursting at the seams and it's time to mask up. So this came out 10 days ago on April 14th. And a senior health official is urging voluntary mask use and other precautions as hospitals in Saskatoon and Regina fill up. Yeah. I mean, we just, like you say, we just finished talking about this. Almost identical subject.
I think
in regards to schools, so.
One thing worth noting here is like the data in this article is like a tad behind, but we are at the highest hospitalizations I believe we have been all pandemic. We're at 417, I want to say.
Yeah.
I think that's...
Although I must say, I just opened up, out of curiosity, the hospitalization numbers in Saskatoon. So their capacity numbers are published live online. I will throw the link in the group chat here. Sure. But this is the first time in probably 2 months that I've looked that they haven't been at capacity or above. So that's actually fairly encouraging for once. This is the first time I've looked and haven't gone, oh God.
That's something.
Yeah.
That's progress.
Honestly, that's the first time I've looked at those and been encouraged in quite a while. So it's possible we've sort of crested. Who knows? The problem is the data we get's a week old. So
that's right. Yeah, we're never really up to date. And even when they're reporting numbers to us, those numbers aren't complete the way they should have been. Yeah. And even since the start of the pandemic, Saskatchewan's numbers haven't been complete the way other provinces have been. So,
well, it's always just trying to muddy the waters, right? Like the less the harder it is to figure out what's going on, the less likely people are to care. So, out of curiosity, do you guys think long term that the public inquiry ever actually happens?
No.
No.
That was a confident no.
Well, we've talked. Yeah, let me backtrack on that. Not while the Sask Party's in power.
Right.
It will not happen. The Sask Party will not do an inquiry on themselves ever, no matter what.
Accountability is not their thing.
That is not in the playbook. Like,
I am sincerely curious to see if they get enough signatures to force that vote, the plebiscite.
Yeah.
I think that's the only chance that it happens, and I think it's a Hail Mary. But man, wouldn't it be something if it happened?
Yeah, plebiscite's not binding. They still just wouldn't do it.
You're right.
Because the backlash is worse for doing it than not doing it.
I think the backlash from rejecting a public plebiscite would be that's pretty next level.
You have far more faith in the conservative base than me. Because
it's not that. It's I have more faith in their desire to cover their own tails. Right? If 50%, if a winning percentage of the electorate votes for a public inquiry, they've got to listen. Like at a certain...
that's the key. I don't actually think they'll get the votes for it because they've already convinced their base that they don't need an inquiry. And if we even can get where there's a plebiscite even happens, right?
So I have a suspicion that their base is a little bit. I have a suspicion that their base has been whittled down a bit. I think there are a lot of people who are curious for an option outside of the Sask Party, and I wish we saw a little bit more ambition from the NDP because I really think if you showed people something interesting right now, they'd listen.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's I think there is a chance of an inquiry. I think there's a chance that the Sask Party loses the next election. I do not think it is a good chance, but I think there is a chance that the Sask Party loses the next election. And at that point, there is a chance. But at that point, I think you have you do the same thing that progressive governments do every time they take over from a corrupt conservative government, which is be too scared of looking partisan, which it's this weird circle, right? It's you have open, naked corruption within your Grant Devine governments, within your Sask Party governments, like open, naked corruption that happens. You get a progressive government that comes in and, we don't want to use inquiries for political payback and that will look bad. And it all sort of just goes away. And then the flip side happens is when the conservative governments get in, there's inquiries over stuff from 10 years previous that was innocuous at best.
Well, that's it, right? There's only, at this point, a lot of conservative parties, like worldwide, and like this is certainly most prevalent in the Republicans, but it's happening everywhere, is just this sort of like this total abandonment of norms.
Yeah.
Just like, so this thing happens. Every teacher goes through this exact same experience where you do a simulation activity where you're like, we're going to do Parliament in our class. Everybody tries to do it. And what you realize very quickly is like, if you lay out the rules, there's always a couple who figure out like, we can play pretty fast and loose with these rules and make some stuff happen. And like, and here's the thing though, they're not like trying to like pass policy. They're just going to try to make it ridiculous. They're just going to try to send it off the rails. And what they figure out quite quickly is it's not that hard in the parliamentary rules to just send stuff completely off the rails.
Yeah.
And that's what they're doing. They're just weaponizing the rules, abandoning norms. And it's all just because they view it as like a sport to be won.
Yes.
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
And our team versus your team.
An inquiry is an own goal. Yeah, the reason I don't think there will never be an inquiry is an inquiry is an own goal. So why would you shoot at your own net?
But like, that's the problem is when you think about it as a sport, yeah, you're going to think about it as an own goal. in reality, like if their actual goal was good governance, of course they do an inquiry. You'd be ridiculous not to.
100%.
Yeah.
But that hasn't been the goal.
Bat an eye.
That hasn't been the goal of a conservative government since 1979. Like, I try and name a
79's being generous.
I will argue that I think Joe Clark wanted to have a good government. I think Joe Clark federally in 79 had for the 3 minutes that he was prime minister.
Yeah.
But whether it's 79 or earlier, but I don't know if you can identify a conservative provincial or federal.
I'll grant you that Joe Clark was a principled conservative.
I disagreed with his policies, but I think he actually wanted those policies rather than just wanted to win.
I'll grant you that. This is it. It's hard for me to think of him objectively just because I differ from him so fundamentally. But like, I don't know. At least it felt like in my mind, a good political system. There's lots of different options, but in the way things are in Canada, if it was actually progressives laying out, ambitious ideas and conservatives trimming the fat, as is meant to be sort of the ebb and flow of this, that would probably be workable. But it doesn't amount to that anymore. It's just one side saying, we get our way or we're taking our ball and going home.
Yeah. And to be fair, I try and I don't know if I'm the most progressive or the least progressive on this podcast. I find myself on weird parts of the spectrum at times. To be fair, the left fall prey to it as well, and some of the most beloved figures on the left fall into that same trap. Because Jack Layton was the Stephen Harper of the left. Jack Layton did that from the left. He was always far more interested in winning than actually implementing policy. He was the king of viewing it as a team sport rather than about governance, which is what needed to happen. He was so beloved because he did view it as a team sport, and that's why he got better at winning. I don't know what the solution is, because you need someone like that in order to get your team, your quote unquote team, to win.
The problem is that, and this is a problem that exists on both sides, but this is actually, I would say, almost much more pronounced on the left, is you need somebody who's principled, especially on the left. You need a person of principle, of values, of ideals, of vision, all of that. But they also need to be a skillful and an effective political operator. And it's very hard to be a person with that degree of principle and be a skillful political operator. Look at the very wide-eyed Jagmeet Singh who rolled into politics with that we accept you thing, and he brought that very positive brand of politics. And look at the changes he's gone through in order to be an effective political operator. Right? I don't know how you do both. I don't know if there's a great answer to that. I don't know if we've seen it.
Yeah,
Tommy
it's tough
Douglas?
because yeah, that's about it, right?
I think you can't do it in one person, because when we talk about Tommy Douglas, especially when we start looking federal, Tommy Douglas isn't Tommy Douglas without Lester Pearson. By the same token, Lester Pearson isn't Lester Pearson without Tommy Douglas, right? Their legacies are so fundamentally intertwined.
The other issue that we got to grapple with, in particular on the left, is that the left is trying to move away from great man politics, right? And so, how do you simultaneously find the leader that you need while moving away from, great leader politics? I don't know, man. And how do you bring together, everybody left of the Liberals is a tremendously wide net. And Layton kind of brought them together, but Singh is not, and I don't know who could.
Different type of depressing.
All right.
Yeah,
that's right. The government, the conservatives think that there is a truck tax coming from the federal government they're very concerned about it. The one guy, if there's a truck tax, he's going to have to drive his motorbike too much. I'm just not sure what the heck this story is. Like, am I supposed to feel bad for these guys? Because I don't. Like,
so that's the people buying like a $60,000 plus truck. Like a $60,000 truck is on the lower end. Complaining about this very minor tax is hilarious to begin with. But like, so the way that this came out was literally just like so coordinated and so obviously just a grift. Like all the conservative premiers, Pierre Poilievre, all at once just attack this tax that doesn't even exist. Yeah. It is just beyond hilarious to me. Especially because it's just a proposed expansion of a tax that Poilievre was part of the group that wrote.
Right.
Well, and I know as someone who tends to be relatively critical of the right, I try and be very careful about criticizing the spitballing the right does, right? Like, if I go combing through the proposals that happen in committees at the Conservative or the UCP or the Sask Party conventions, boy, howdy could I come up with a lot of ammunition, right? Like, there is some crazy shit that gets proposed that never becomes part of a platform, let alone becomes part of policy that actually gets implemented. Because we all know there's a bunch of stuff that does go into platforms that still are never actually going to get implemented. But like things that aren't actually going to enter into the platform, there's not a lot of point in me going in and trying to go, gotcha, you said here in this committee at this convention that, X, Y, Z. Like, that's stupid because there's enough real things to attack. It's like praised by faint damnation. It's like if the best you can come up with is a proposal that some guy at some committee brought forward, that's not a real thing to criticize. And there should be there's enough real stuff to criticize in conservative platforms. And if you are a conservative, there should be enough things in the liberal platform for you to critique. Like, go after things you don't agree with, but find ones that are real.
But further to that, like, is a personal use truck tax that bad an idea? Like, I live in a neighborhood with a fairly mixed neighborhood, and there's lots of houses that have 2 trucks. Like, right. How on earth do you need 2 trucks? Like 2 full-size half-tons. Like with the big super crew and all that stuff where like they cost more than my house. Yeah. And the obsession with trucks and this notion that you need a colossal truck to drive on a Saskatchewan highway. Otherwise you're going to just plummet to your death. I cannot process because like I've driven a few of these trucks before, and it's like driving a Sherman tank. And I have no idea why these people feel it's that necessary for their just day-to-day driving a Sobeys.
It's a carryover, right? A lot of guys that live in the cities now, like maybe they started working on rigs or they're related to the oil field in some way. And when you go to the rig, you're going on a lot of back roads. So you have to have a good truck. But you also are burning a massive amount of fuel, right? Like the thing is, if you're living in the city, you're burning way more fuel than you would be going to the rig, going to your off-road job 100 kilometers away.
Well, and that's exactly why I said personally used trucks, right? Like if you're using it for a job site or something, that makes sense. And a lot of those guys who are taking them out to work on the rigs, make some allowance for that or something. For sure. Yeah. I don't pretend to have a perfect answer. But like for the folks who are getting a gigantic truck and it is spotlessly clean and like, the ones, right? The ones that have They've never had anything, like they put in the Rhino liner in the back and it has never had a scratch in it, and just like the whole thing.
And it's going to be replaced in 2 years. Because they buy it new and then replace it 2 years later with a different new one.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's right.
It's how they have a $120,000 loan on a $50,000 or $80,000 truck.
And
that
part of the
that doesn't fit in the standard garage.
Yeah, that's right. Part of the thing here is like if and it's not happening. Right. Nobody's actually imposing this tax. But if we're putting a tax on trucks, we could even justify it by saying this is going towards carbon emissions. Like this is going towards this sort of environmental thing, because the number of trucks in Saskatchewan, I know that there's not that many people in Saskatchewan, but we are beating the hell out of our environment by driving these trucks. It's not good for us.
But like on the flip side, like putting a tax on gas trucks specifically, you know, like I can say I've got a bunch of friends in trades who are extremely excited about the electric trucks coming out that they can like power their job sites off of and stuff. Like once give it, you know, another year and create incentives to move to those electric trucks, and people will in droves.
Yep.
So like, why not tax the gas?
And we're one of
trucks?
the only provinces that doesn't have an incentive to buy electric.
Yeah.
Oh man.
We've got the opposite.
Yeah. Like
I did a breakdown of that fairly recently in a TikTok, and like Quebec has over like Quebec, I think it's Quebec and BC have by orders of magnitude more sold than anywhere else in Canada. And shockingly, they're the ones with the subsidies. And Saskatchewan, with our added tax, is sold by far the least.
I bought an electric car in 2014, and when I bought mine, I was one of 100 that were owned in the province. Over half of that 100 were owned by Sask Power. As demonstration. When I bought, but I had to buy it out of province. And I had to buy it used. It would be ridiculous to not buy it used because the pricing takes into account the rebate. So I bought it I bought it a 2-year-old vehicle. So I bought a 2012 electric vehicle in 2014. The person who bought it initially would have gotten a $7,000 rebate. So the used price reflects that. So, but what that does is not only does it disincentivize buying electric, it disincentivizes people who do want to buy electric for buying in Saskatchewan. There is no way, shape, or form, if you are interested in an electric vehicle, that you should be buying it in this province. You almost have to buy, and you have to be registered. Basically, there's a bunch of complications. You're also almost having to buy it used. And as a result of that sort of thing, with the lack of incentives, we're really low on the pecking order for where those companies are sending vehicles. Mm-hmm. So if you want an electric vehicle in Saskatchewan, a buddy of mine just bought one. He went through the whole process. You basically are buying a vehicle sight unseen. Yep. There's nothing you can test drive. You just order one and hope you like it. That's what I did. Wow. I bought it from Portland. It was a car dealership out of Vancouver. It was a American car. So, but it was a car broker from Vancouver. I got in touch with them, paid for it to be shipped. It cost me $1,000 to ship it. I owned it for 5 years, and it was still cheaper to pay the $1,000 shipping, to pay an extra $4,000 compared to a similar gas-powered vehicle. I saved more in gas on the 5 years that I owned it than I spent on buying a more expensive vehicle and paying for it to be shipped and all of that. Best car I've ever owned. But we don't have the infrastructure, so I couldn't drive to Saskatoon in it. So it only worked when we were a 2-car family. Now that I'm in a 1-car household, I can't have it anymore, which sucks. And I'm hoping a few years down the road that'll change again, and we'll get the infrastructure, and we'll get the ability to drive from Regina to Saskatoon. You just take a half-hour break partway through, and you're good. But until we have the infrastructure, it's that chicken and the egg thing, right? It's you have this vicious circle of no one's buying the car because there isn't the infrastructure, but they're saying there's no need to build the infrastructure because no one's buying the cars.
So out of curiosity, the number one thing that I get, because I post about electric vehicles fairly regularly, and there's sort of the same yahoos in the comments repeatedly saying
try driving one.
the same Yahoo things, but they always are going on and on about how, in their minds, Saskatchewan is a frozen wasteland 24 hours a day.
Yeah,
and
7 days a week,
does the
365 days a year.
I'm not crazy. The cold does not bother them that much, does it?
So the cold reduces the range. So they are 100% right. The cold absolutely reduces the range. And again, I'm going to point out, I owned a 2012 with by the end when I sold it, it was a 7-year-old battery, and you do need to replace the battery every 7 to 8 years. So it was nearing the end of its battery life. But yeah. And mine, again, was not a Tesla. I am not rich enough to be a Tesla owner. Mine was a Nissan Leaf. But I had about 140 kilometers of range in the summer. In spring and fall, maybe 150, because AC drops the range a little bit as well. In minus 40, like dead of winter, minus 40, big winds, it could drop to as little as 80 kilometers of range. So it does have an impact. However, one of the things to remember, if you don't have a timer on your block heater, so your gas-powered car, if you don't have a timer on your block heater and you leave your car, regular gas-powered car, plugged in to a block heater overnight, that uses more electricity than my Leaf would take to charge fully. That's the level of electricity I use. And what I would do every morning is I had in the middle of winter, I had it set while it was still plugged in. And I have a little fancy app for the car, because even entry level, they can have an app for it because there's no engine to turn on. There's no need for command start because it's all electric. I just programmed it in. The heater started about a half hour before I got in. The wheel heated up, the steering wheel, the seats, all of that was at full heat before I got in it in the morning, which meant it used less power when not unplugged. So I unplugged it. It was already fully warm on the inside. I didn't need to have the heater cranked while driving. It was luxurious. It was wonderful, because you can run it in your garage because there's no carbon monoxide coming out of it. So you can have the heater running for as long as you want before you get it inside a closed garage. And it drove amazing. And it will never not start because it has its own built-in heater. So it is perpetually plugged into its own block heater. Because car batteries won't work under 25 degrees. That's why we need to have block heaters. The liquids inside the battery start to freeze. I'm not a car guy, but this is the research I figured out. With an electric car, they have block heaters built into them as well, but the block heater is powered by the giant lithium battery. So it is perpetually plugged into a block heater all the time, 24/7, but it's powered by its own battery as opposed to the inefficient system that a gas-powered car will do. So it will never not start. It will always be the equivalent of starting a plugged-in car. And again, you lose a little bit of a trickle charge throughout the day. But I would, if you think about it like bars on your cell phone, I would have 12 bars of charge. It would take 2-3 bars to drive to work. On a minus 40 day, if I was at work for 10 hours, I would lose 1 bar, drive home, plug it in. Nothing, it didn't faze me. And city driving was fine. In the 5 years I owned it, I had range anxiety one time. And it was because I had to drive all the way from one end of town back and forth a couple times, because I got home and my wife at the time had forgotten something at her mother-in-law's, who was literally polar opposite ends of the city. So we had to drive back and get home. And that one time we sort of drove into the garage with about maybe 8 or 9 kilometers worth of range left. And it was a bit scary, but it's easy to drive and they're fun to drive. I'm a huge advocate of them. I could rant for ages about them because the only car I've ever driven that has had even remotely close to the fun that it is to drive one. I rented a car once when I was on vacation and they ran out of cars and they gave me a sports car to drive for the week, and it was a top end. I was scared, but I was driving this $70,000 sports car in England, on the wrong side of the road. That was the only car I've ever driven that had something even close to the level of handling my $20,000 Leaf had. Because again, it's instant torque. I don't know if that's the car word. Yeah. But yep. It was super fun to drive. I will die on the hill of electric vehicles.
That's awesome. My
Yeah,
next
for sure.
one, my next vehicle is 100% going to be electric. I just have no idea when that's going to be. They have to be available first.
That's fair.
I'm leaning that way. I have quite the commute to work, but if some of these charging stations go up along the route that I take, then I will definitely be going to the electric vehicle.
Right on.
And the level 2 charging stations, which aren't the ones they're going to put on highway. Highway need level 3 because the level 3s are the ones that'll charge you in half an hour. But the level 2s cost about $1,000. For the entire 5 years I owned mine, I never even bothered to get one. I just plugged it into a wall outlet. And that's all I ever needed for charging it. And I was meant to get around to getting a level 2 charger, but the cost of a level 2 charger 5 years ago, at least, they're probably cheaper now. Like I said, it was about $500 or about $1,000. If you get you can get it wired into your house, and then you're paying about $500 for the machine and then $500 for an electrician to wire it in. Or you can get ones that plug into like a dryer outlet, like the 240 volt ones. In which case you're paying about $500 for someone to wire that type of outlet into your house and $500 for the machine that plugs into it. So, and those charge them very quick.
Doesn't sound like much if you say it fast.
It's still real money. Like, don't get me wrong. It's not nothing. But again, 5 years of owning it, never needed it. I always, like I said, plugged it into a wall outlet just like you would a block heater.
I currently spend $600 a month on fuel.
Yeah.
So
with an electric vehicle, that would drop it to about $60 a month of electricity.
I walk to work.
Even better. Yeah.
I moved fairly recently, and this wasn't by design, but I happen to have chosen a house that's about 6 blocks away from my work.
Nice.
So unless it's minus a bazillion, I just walk. So
Smart.
I'll probably wait to buy for a while yet, just because why bother?
Yep, for sure. Cover the new provincial tax on entertainment services, including gyms. And the Sask gym industry, fitness industry, considers it a short-sighted. So it's, we talked about this a little bit around the budget. There's a new tax on entertainment services, and that includes the fitness centers and an increased tax on various other things like cigarettes. I know people are unhappy about the increased price of cigarettes. So
I happen to have a couple of friends who own gyms, and they are furious about this.
Okay.
Like, it's tough because like the pandemic was brutal for gyms. Like, unless they were big commercial Globo gyms, like a lot of the local gyms closed up shop, went out of business, had to downsize. Like, they have been holding on by their teeth. Like, I know lots of different gyms got shut down, and like lots of small independent gyms depended on members still paying dues even though the gym was closed, just to try to keep the lights on. Like, this is such a slap in the face to gyms specifically, but like it very specifically targets like basically every industry you can think of that got hit hard by COVID. This hits. Like, who do we really want to stick it to? Hospitality, I'm trying
all
to think
those businesses they said we were opening up to support.
Yeah.
And said, fuck them.
Open for business.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, we're going to tax.
And I understand the idea of wanting to harmonize it with the GST. Like, it does make sense to some degree to say, if you're going to, like, let's just have the sales tax that we have federally, just will line up with that. So I understand some of the rationale behind it, but then you need to partner that with saying, hey, there's going to be increased revenue, but there's also going to be decreased bureaucracy, and we're going to take the savings and reinvest it back into industries that are getting hit by this, at the very least as a temporary measure. Even if you don't want to be tax and spend, like, we're going to add this 5% tax and give it right back to you. And I understand not wanting to necessarily do it that way, but at least say temporarily give some cushioning to navigate through that. This seems short-sighted as a political move, but
well, it's not just short-sighted as a political move. Like, it's short-sighted to continue, like, to throw another just lead weight on an industry that's struggling. And it speaks to a larger problem that Saskatchewan's dealing with and going to have to deal with, which is they've created this climate that's extremely focused on business, but has completely lost sight of the amenities that you need to make people come here and want to work and run their businesses here.
Yeah,
right? Like if you go to, Regina and you're thinking about starting your business or expanding your business to Regina, and you're like, well, there's a worker shortage. Well, what are they doing to appeal to workers? Well, they're running a bunch of restaurants out of business. So pretty soon all that's going to be left is Olive Garden. And they're running all the gyms out of business. So pretty soon all that's going to be left is Planet Fitness. So it's like they're going out of their way to take away things that make Saskatchewan appealing. Because so you may not know this, Saskatchewan. So I was a competitive powerlifter for years. Saskatchewan is one of the powerlifting capitals of the world. We have like world champions and all manner of stuff. And like almost all of that powerlifting happens in little small independent gyms who are just getting smashed by this.
There used to be in Weyburn, there used to be a lot of really good powerlifters coming out of there.
There still are. There still are. Olympia In-Depth Performance, shout out. They put out a ton of lifters still.
But
yeah,
the Saskatchewan government, they can't, I guess, make enough money off of that. So
oh no, you got to keep getting blood from the stone, man.
Yeah.
You need the money if you're going to bail out the poor, underprivileged resource companies that just really, they need our support. Maybe a couple of ads with Sarah McLachlan music playing in the background.
Right. Yeah.
You got to think about the real victims here.
Orphaned wells.
That's a good note to end on.
Yeah. All right, Steve, where can people find your stuff?
I am on TikTok as Boots on the Ground at Steve_Boots. And I've got a website where you can find all my stuff. It's boots.news. And you can find me on Twitter as Steve_Boots. Perfect.
If people want to find more of our stuff, you can do that at anchor.fm/frommanypeoples. Our Twitter is at skpoliticspod. Our Facebook is facebook.com/frommanypeoplesstrengthpod. All of the show notes are at my podcast, which is at my blog, which is skepticalleftistpod.wordpress.com. I'm not paying for my own domain. You can email us at frommanypeoples@gmail.com. And if you want to send us money, you can do that at buymeacoffee.com/frommanypeoples. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me this evening.
Thanks so much for having me. This was great.
Thank you, as always, Corey, for doing the hard work to make it happen. Letting us show up and just talk and spout opinions.
That's my favorite part. So.